Eastern and Southern Africa's communications chief with UNICEF, of course, talking to us there about 6,000 deaths expected of children due to the focus on COVID-19, and that these children will die of preventable diseases if we don't watch for that. Well, hunger flashpoints such as looting of supermarkets, streets, demonstrations and more are on the increase. The Southern African Food Sovereignty Campaign has called for the Solidarity Fund to be democratized and for the ANC government to form a partnership with civil society. In the following webinar, the causes of the worsening hunger crisis and challenges in government-civil society relationship is explored. Let's take you there.
Short food supply systems that will exist post-COVID. However, the current regulations of government to clamp down on the work that has been done by civil society brought a lot of frustration from last week when we started getting indication that the government would like NGOs to apply for 48 hours to DSD officials and SABC and disclose the contents of the food packages. And also the whole clamping down and closing down of food kitchens that are run by churches that have been doing it for many decades and feeding the many homeless that are not able to access electricity and homes to be able to cook the raw food that can be supplied. And I think what we have seen is the heavy-handed approach of government and really antagonizing the people that have been in the forefront of doing the work. And I think I'm not representing the entire civil society here. I'm representing my own organizations that have been doing work. And I think I'd like to express the general feeling of the people that I've been talking to, who are, some of them are part of C19, some of them are not, that we definitely acknowledge the challenge of trying to make sure that we flatten the curve, that we do not perpetuate the spread of COVID-19. However, we believe that there are other ways of doing this. So definitely we do not, we absolutely reject the approach that DSD has taken to now centralize the provision of the food parcels. Also to close down the food kitchens and the soup kitchens that have been existing for a very long time. And actually, in a way, coercing organizations to be able to provide the food that they have raised the resources for to the DSD lists, who we know they are not inclusive of the people who are undocumented in this country, and that the NGOs and the civil society have been playing a big role in the churches in making sure that those people are also able to be fed. So for me, that's a very very concerning situation that we see in our country, as we are trying to adhere to these rules by applying to DSD and SABC to get permissions to deliver the food within 48 hours, and there's no response. What do? We will see a lot of people going to bed hungry, and we'll see a revolt of our people, because we are concerned that our people will definitely die from hunger before COVID-19 reach them. And what are we supposed to be doing? And I think there are ways that we could be able to do this. DSD could be able to play a role together with SABC, not to police the civil society when they provide the food, but actually to provide support to make sure that the places where the food is being handed out, there is social distancing, instead of saying everything has to be closed down, has to go through us, and if not, then nothing else. For me, I find it very offensive to our people, and really undermining the freedom of this country. And I think if the DSD are not also cautious about what the minister is putting out there, words like tightening, the screws, and using this very offensive language that will get many people who've been really wanting to join hands with the government to provide for many of our people, millions who are not able to access the food currently. We will see a serious pushback and a serious revolt. The other issue is about what the Solidarity Fund is doing, providing all these much needed resources. Our concern is who are the people that are buying the food for, the food that they are providing the packages for. And also, are they recognizing the fact that there's already a compromise in terms of small producers. Retailers have been open all the time during the lockdown. They have been benefiting. What is the Solidarity Fund, through the organizations that they are supporting, doing to making sure that the small players are also benefiting? So this is something that I would like to put onto the table as we start this conversation, that there are other ways that we could be doing this that would make sure that our communities are sustainable and are being sustained beyond COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Dora. I'm going to bring in Des Dessa. Des is a renowned activist and leader in South Africa, and he's been fighting climate and environmental justice battles in the Durban area for many, many years. Des works with subsistence fishers, I think about 12,000 of them. But he's going to bring a very important dimension into our conversation. Des, over to you.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks. Wow, it's good to see old comrades like Dora and Mervyn I haven't seen for a long time. Nice to see you guys, and good to see the fight still carries on. And while Vish and Jane, I'm always on talks and discussions. And Tim, I don't know, so probably get to know about Tim today. I belong to the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance, but I also belong to the Coalition of the Poor in Durban. So I'm going to take off my environmental hat for a second, although it's all linked. Environmental justice and human rights are one and the same, and food security and food sovereignty and everything we talk about is one and the same. But I'd rather talk about the coalition that represents the 10 hostels in Durban, where we got about 400,000 people. The shack dwellers Abashadi, Basam John Dolo, the biggest shack dwellers movement in Durban. The fisher folks that represent over 30,000 subsistence fisher folks, 12,000 in Durban and all on our coastline, subsistence farmers, but also the informal traders, the migrant communities, the street traders, the market users, and all poor communities that form part of the coalition in Durban that we've been working together on the last couple of 3 years. The issue is that poverty has gone worse since the lockdown. Food is not getting to people. People in hostels are hungry. They're getting absolutely nothing. They are living and most of these people that live in hostels and shacks are casual workers. All the work that shut them down were casual workers. Some of them are informal traders that sell food on the streets. That has all been stopped. The fisher folks have been fishing since time immemorial, hundreds of years on our coastline and in the harbor. We won a 10-year battle in 2014. That's all shut down without any discussion. The people I'm talking about are not getting any assistance from government at all. The fisher folks, the people with commercial boats that are supplying the fish factories and the canneries in Cape Town and the Northern Cape, they're all working. They've all been allowed to fish. They've got 48 people and a number of co-ops, just 6 co-ops in our province that are operating. Very few people. And from those co-ops, most of the people on those co-ops are rich people. So the fishermen that I represent, subsistence, they're poor, they fish for a living. They fish to take food home every day. They fish to go and sell some of that food so they can put other essentials on the table. They've been deprived of that. There's no assistance. We've been trying to talk to government at national level, at DAF. We've been talking to government at provincial level. Absolutely no assistance. They shift you from one pillar to the next. The last couple of weeks have been very frustrating. Eventually, we went to the presidency. We received a letter from the presidency, your matter is receiving attention 2 weeks ago, and nothing more. So people have to stay for 2 weeks without no food, have to go to bed hungry. Their children are hungry. There's nobody that we can get hold of and talk to. That is the problem. No one wants to listen. No one wants to talk to. And if you do get somebody, they pass the buck on to the next person. In 2 days, I went to speak to over 15 people in different departments. And finally, they told me I must go to a person in Cape Town, the director of fisheries in Cape Town, Sue Middleton. I've tried to get all of her today. I couldn't get all of her. Her juniors, I got all of him. After a day and night trying to get hold of him until late yesterday, I got hold of him this morning. And still, no response to how they're going to deal with this fisherman. Because you must remember, subsistence fishermen have been social distancing for years, the rod and reel fishermen. They can't fish together. They can't stand together because you won't be able to cast. If you know fishing, you won't be able to cast your rod. And yet they're not allowed to fish. But those on boats that are very close together can fish together and they won't be affected with coronavirus. You're going to see what's going to happen there. That's where CEO 1919 is going to come from. Those on the coastline that have been deprived of fishing are really, that should never have happened. There should have been a proper and meaningful consultation with people, and we could have told them what is required and what is needed. We could have provided the mask and the things for those fishermen. But there are social distancing. It's not a sport of contact. It's not a contact sport. And yet they've been deprived of fishing for a livelihood and taking on food. Now for all their lives, they've sent their children to school through fishing. They've educated their kids. They put food on their table. They paid for services. Now they've got to beg for a living. They go stand in food queues because government is not prepared to help them. And they're not even getting any assistance at all. So I think government, yesterday I heard the story from the MEC Dube, Nomsa Dube. She's from economics. You know what she said when I confronted them on the Zoom call about the fishermen in Durban? I said, but you know, fishermen are deprived. She said, well, fishing is not banned. But why isn't that message then escalated to all officials, to the police? Because that's where they have been. Fishermen have been arrested for fishing for a livelihood without no one consulting them. The chairperson of the KZN subsistence fishermen, they came with 5 vehicles at his house to pick him up and never charged him, but harassed him and threatened him. It's the old apartheid system coming back to Wanta, where security gates, where they pick up people, they threaten you, they fight with you, and then they interrogate you, and then they say at the end, after about a few hours, okay, now you can go. It's a system coming back, and if we're not careful, this will affect the country. Democracy will be a threat. This is what's happening to our poor people, to poor fishermen. This is what's happening to shack dwellers. Their homes have been broken in Durban. They're not given a break from that, even that. So the COVID virus, they talk about, oh, you must social distance, you must wash your hands. They break their homes, they break their water, they destroy everything. How can people be treated worse than even animals are treated in this country? This is the problem we are facing, and if we don't stand up and speak out against it, we are going to find at the end of the day, our civil liberties will be undermined, be taken away right under our nose. Never did I ever expect that I will be hard and fast and speak very firm about these issues when I can see poverty. I live in an area where there's a lot of poverty. I see it in the fishermen's faces. I've never seen grown-up old men crying. I've never seen people, their families crying, like what I've seen now. And I think we need to really organize properly around the country so that we all can come together and say, we can't accept this. Yes, we understand the coronavirus is a deadly disease. We understand it clearly. We understand that it kills people. We understand it because we see people getting killed in our community. But poverty is also killing our people. Violence is killing our people. Human rights abuses are killing our people. And I think that's important, that we should not allow that to happen, what has happened in the past, that it repeats itself once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Des. I'm going to bring in Mervyn Abrahams from Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity NGO. They've been doing amazing work for years, tracking food prices in South Africa. And they've also been campaigning and engaging around the COVID crisis and food. Mervyn, over to you.
Thank you, Vish, and thank you for the opportunity to engage on this platform. The angle that I will take, and of course the angle that the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity works from, is that the majority of South African holders are net buyers of food. And being net buyers of food, the issue around the affordability of food therefore determines the access and the level of household food security in the country. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. A new system doesn't have to be that way, but that is what we are engaged in currently. And so affordability, how much money we have in our pockets, and the prices of food are determinative of whether households are suffering hunger or not. So let us just look at the price increases that we have seen over the last 3 months, just from before the lockdown to the 1st of May. The food basket has 38 foods, very basic foods like rice, maize meal, flour, sugar, cooking oil, some vegetables, and some meat. Now, in the last 3 months, we have seen this basket increase by 249 Rand and 92 cents. So that's 7.8%, from 3,221 Rand to 3,470 Rand and 92 cents as the 1st of May. So that is a massive increase. I mean, when we look, for instance, at the increase in the old age pension grant, that increase was 250 Rand. So essentially by now, that increase has been taken off the shelf. I mean, a household living off an old age pension to purchase their food would be now in exactly the same place where they were pre-lockdown. We've also seen, because we also track a small basket of household, domestic and personal hygiene, and there we have also seen an increase of roughly about 7%. So the increases we have seen by and large are, just to mention a few, are mainly in the core foods. So things like rice has increased by 26%, flour by 3%, sugar by 6%, cooking oil by 11%, white bread by 15%, and brown bread by 14%. And then we also saw major increases in fresh vegetables, like potatoes by 8%, onions by 58%, spinach by 13%, and cabbage by 22%. Part of this increase in the cost of vegetables is directly connected to the absence of the informal traders being able to operate in our townships and on our streets. Because the women tell us that they would prefer to buy from the informal traders. For one, their prices are much more affordable. Two, that they allow you to buy in quantities that the supermarkets would not allow you to buy in. And three, they have formed a relationship of trust with the informal traders. So we have seen that part of this increase in cost are directly connected to the absence of informal traders not being on the streets to trade. When we are looking in terms of affordability, of course, then we are seeing that prices and incomes are of critical importance. When we look at the cost of our basket, which is 3,470 Rand, and compare this with just some form of income, the median wage in South Africa is somewhere in the region of about between 3,200 and 3,500. The national minimum wage is at 3,500. So you can already see that households are not able to afford a basket of basic food. When we look at the coronavirus grant, great that we have received that grant. But when we look at 350, we see what can you buy with that? Essentially, you can buy a loaf of brown bread for each day of the month. That is where that would take us. The child support grant increase of 300 Rand does not really make that much of a difference, because the cost to feed a child has increased to something in the region of 678 Rand. And of course, children don't live by themselves. They live as part of the household. And so that grant in any case helps to cover the food needs of the entire household. If I might just very quickly go on and move a bit away from the figures, and share with what are we seeing on the ground? What are women telling us on the ground? The first thing is that food has never been affordable. And so the COVID-19 has only deepened hunger, but hunger has existed before COVID-19. Food has not been affordable, and it continues not to be affordable. They also tell us that while before the lockdown, their food might have lasted for about 3 weeks of the month, the last week being a very, very bad week in households. Now food only lasts for 2 weeks because the children are at home and everybody is at home, and so more people are eating. So that is important to know, that food only lasts roughly around 2 weeks. That the increases in the social grants are not enough to meet their food needs. Furthermore, they tell us that the restrictions, the lockdown restrictions, have greatly impacted on their ability to shop. So one example is that women tell us that the queues are massively long, and because the queues are massively long, they need to get into the store as quickly as they can, do the shopping that they can, and then try and get the taxi back home. The implication of this is that women can no longer go from store to store looking for specials in order to stretch their budget. And so they are almost a captive audience now to the corporate sector. What can we do? I think the first thing that we would like to recommend is, firstly, that we need to look at the cost of the food parcels that are being distributed. We have heard of food parcels being distributed of 1,200, 1,500, and 1,700. When we look at the cost for a household of 7, it is 3,470. So these food parcels are not sufficient to feed a family. Secondly, if food only lasts for about 2 weeks, that means that these parcel distribution needs to happen at least every 2 weeks, if not more often than that. Thirdly, what we would like to say is that this whole thing around regulations, we have heard of households being told that they do not qualify for a food parcel from DST because they have an income of 1,800 Rand or an income of 3,600 Rand. Our research shows that if a household has an income of 3,600 Rand, then that household is in poverty, that household is suffering hunger, and that household definitely requires that food parcel. Food parcels, of course, as you have said, which we totally agree with, are merely an emergency response. Really what we require is a transformed food system that brings food closer to the home, that prioritizes the informal sector, and that allows the fishers and the informal and the small-scale farmers a much bigger role in our food sector and not only the corporate sector. Thank you. We can carry on with some others in discussions afterwards.
Thank you so much, Mervyn, for those insights, powerful insights into how hunger is really kind of working in households. I'm going to bring in Tim Abba, who's a small-scale farmer, and he's been working with farming issues for about 10 years in South Africa, and he's been doing a lot of food relief work on the ground. Tim, are you there? Tim? We might be having a technical problem with Tim. Okay, I'm going to move on to Anoki Parikh, who works at the Solidarity Fund. Anoki has been one of the frontline people engaged in the food relief effort within the Solidarity Fund. And thank you so much for making the time and for coming on to this platform to find sort of a common framework for partnership. Over to you, Anoki. You need to unmute.
Oh, sorry about that. Somehow never gets old, this kind of muting yourself thing. Thanks everyone for inviting me to this panel. It's a real honor to be here and amongst a group of people who have obviously been working on these issues for decades. As Vishwas said, my name is Anoki, and I'm here in my capacity as the program manager for the food relief program at the Solidarity Fund. And I'm here to share what we have done so far and our thinking behind it, recognizing that it's kind of step one. And I'm also, more importantly, I'm actually here to listen and get input about how the fund might shape its thinking in the coming months. And I'm glad we're in agreement that we don't all have the answers, and agree wholeheartedly that this is about kind of creating networks of solidarity to address the scale of the challenge at hand. So in terms of the presentation, I have some kind of slides up just to kind of help the points and the data land. In the next 10 minutes, I'd like to provide some context about the fund's overall mandate, because I think it sets the stage for the type of work, the type of collaboration that would be kind of most fruitful. The second is to spend most of this discussion diving into sort of what we did in food relief. And then the third is to close out with some reflections on opportunities for partnership. So I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully there should be no challenges with that. Just give me a second. Can people see my screen?
Yeah, great.
Brilliant. Okay, so just to kind of overview, I guess we all know that the fund was announced on 23rd March by President Ramaphosa to unite the nation in our response to the crisis. And, you know, in reality, the fund is really only 5 or 6 weeks old, and has, of course, a sort of very large mandate. There's 3 things I'd like to kind of emphasize about the fund. So the first is that it's critical to note that we are a rapid response vehicle and that our mandate is to be fast. The second is that we are responding to the COVID crisis, and so a lot of our work is really, you know, short-term in nature. You know, we don't see ourselves as being, you know, here for years to come. And then the third is we are independent. So while we are partnering with government, with business, and with civil society, we are independently administered. And so in that context, I think that sort of tells us sort of what, you know, I think that this kind of helps us narrow down the space for collaboration between us. The fund has 3 focus areas. The first is health response, which is the bulk of our disbursement. This disbursement has focused largely around the procurement of PPE for frontline healthcare workers, including community health workers, the procurement of test kits, and the procurement of ventilators. This is, as you can see on the slide, 70 to 75% of our planned disbursement, and a very large number of disbursements have already been made, and these kind of this PPE has been ordered, and some of it is being manufactured locally. The second pillar is the humanitarian effort, and food relief falls under this. We have only made 1 disbursement within humanitarian relief to date, which is on food, which I will discuss in a minute. But obviously, in the coming months, we'd want to think about what else we might be able to do. So there are kind of discussions around the importance of the Solidarity Fund responding to the rise in gender-based violence, for example, or thinking about what the next phase of food relief could look like. And I'd love to get input from the group on this. And then finally, the third is the Solidarity Campaign, which is essentially a campaign that will unite the nation in action against COVID. And it's sort of, you know, around behavior change and understanding kind of how to respond and be in this new world that we are all living in with social distancing and staying at home and all the rest. And especially as the economy hopefully reopens, what that kind of means for our health. So that's the overall kind of structure of the fund at the moment. I think with that in mind, I'll spend the rest of the discussion on food relief. And I guess it's important for us to understand how we framed the problem and what our entry point was into that problem. And, you know, wholeheartedly agree and understand the scale of food insecurity in South Africa, even prior to COVID. And, you know, the general household survey saying that 4 million South African households experience some form of food insecurity, and 1 million acute food insecurity. And we know that by limiting people's incomes, the COVID lockdown has exacerbated this food insecurity crisis. And everyone that's spoken to date has only added kind of really important kind of detail and depth to that statement. But in the context of what the fund did, when the lockdown was announced about 5 weeks ago, I don't even know how many, time moves very in strange ways these days. the government was, we know as a fund, we were sort of our view was that the government was putting together clear relief measures in place to address the unprecedented challenge at an unprecedented scale. And they were working towards developing a systemic solution to support households via grants. And we didn't know all the details, but we knew that those grants were hopefully going to come in, and they did come online. And of course, the question about whether they're sufficient or not is a separate one. But in that moment, which was literally the day that the lockdown was announced, or in the 2 weeks that followed the lockdown announcement, the fund, like everyone else, I guess, expected a rising hunger crisis and made a decision to disperse 120 million rand towards immediate food relief to be rolled out through the lockdown period. And I think that this is important to know because this food relief would be directed as a stopgap measure while the other systems kind of came online. And we were aware that our food relief is not necessarily a systemic solution, it is relief. And that actually, when we're thinking about longer term systemic solutions, we would look into our next phases of work to think about what that might look like. So it's also important to note, I guess, that in the scheme of the scale of the food crisis, 120 million rand is a small amount. It's a large amount for the Solidarity Fund. It's a large amount in general. But if we're talking about millions of households experiencing food insecurity, we are just a small player in this, and we are a very important part of the solution, but we would need kind of government and civil society to work together to really address the scale of the problem. So we arrived upon a few guiding principles for our food response. The first is speed, and I think that was because we were responding to a hunger crisis within the lockdown, and our timelines for this has been days and weeks and not months, and that is because our mandate was relief. The second is geographic reach. We, as a fund that's national in nature, our goal was to reach all 9 provinces, of course, and have very good urban and rural coverage and reach the most deprived municipalities in South Africa. Finally, the resource efficiency was an important part as well. So that the funds that we would be dispersing towards food would be going to food rather than to distribution and to other kind of ancillary costs. We worked hard to kind of reduce margins wherever possible, so that we were getting the kind of best rate on all of these on these food parcels. The second, and then finally, I guess traceability. We need to be able to validate delivery to beneficiary households, safety of the distribution, and that we would work with a wide range of partners across civil society, private sector, and government. Now, I think one of the things that I'd like to come back to towards the end of this discussion is that in the back of our mind, we were thinking about how can this relief effort become part of building a longer term system, right? So over a 2 or 3 month timeline, can we leverage the existing food distribution efforts of government, of NGOs, of faith-based organizations, of community-based organizations that are really doing the hard work of reaching vulnerable communities every day? Can we leverage that and bring them together to build last mile distribution platforms for future humanitarian and ongoing kind of crises, right? And this could be kind of the physical distribution. It could also be thinking about mechanisms to reach people through cash or vouchers. It could be about linking smallholder farmers who are struggling to get their produce to market and informal vendors that are critical to household food security. It could be about ensuring the circulation of cash in the local economy. But what's important is that while we're thinking about this, that the timeline for this work is longer, right? It's not a kind of 3-week timeline. And that food relief disbursement would be the critical kind of first step of that. So I'd like to come back to that kind of towards the end of this conversation about what we might be able to do to build that out. So what we did was we had a kind of 4-pillar distribution strategy. We distributed parcels to 250,000 households through government and civil society. About 25% of that happened through the Department of Social Development CNDC centers, the community nutrition and development centers, that there are 235 of across South Africa, and they feed amongst the most vulnerable households in the country. Their operations were affected by lockdown, and we were kind of supporting. We entered into a partnership with the Department of Social Development to provide food parcels to those households. 75% of our disbursement actually happened through NGOs, CBOs, and faith-based organizations. So the second pillar of our work was to work with large food nonprofits, such as Food Forward South Africa, Islamic Relief, Lunchbox Fund, and Africa Tikkun. There are 4 that we worked with to reach households across 9 provinces. And each of these organizations has their own network of community-based organizations that they usually serve. They have different ways of buying food and buy it from different kind of sources. But essentially, a bulk of our kind of distribution took place through these four large NPOs. And then we identified some kind of critical gap areas in terms of geographic reach. We had not sufficient reach in rural areas through the first and second approach, and we worked with community-based and faith-based organizations to reach those households. And I think that a lot of kind of organizations that some of you might know, like the Association for Rural Advancement, we gave a few thousand parcels to the C19 People's Coalition in Gauteng and Western Cape, Hope Africa, Rural Democracy Trust, Hlanganisa, Community Chest. I mean, there's a long list of partners, and we will publish those partners on the online shortly on our website. And then finally, we had the 4th pillar, which is around vouchers. And here, I think this pillar is really anchored around experimentation and building better systems, in addition to obviously providing immediate relief. And it came from the recognition that it's better to give people choice to determine what they need and have solutions that put cash back into the local economy. And so in this regard, we have partnered with the SACC, who through their local ecumenical network have identified vulnerable populations that they'd like to serve with a variety of voucher and cash transfer options. We recognize that not many of the options are kind of meet all our requirements. There are a bunch of options that are big retail only. There's some options that are spaza only but are not integrated into a big retailer solution. And so we're sort of experimenting and trying to find options and integrations, ways to integrate these solutions to give beneficiaries the most amount of choice. And certainly would love inputs from the group here about what kind of experimentation would be useful here. So that's kind of how we did the food parcel delivery, and we've aimed for countrywide coverage. That's the kind of map of what we had planned. It's not a complete map. There are areas that we are covering that are not clearly indicated on this map. So, for example, we do actually have coverage in Beaufort West, but it's not on this map. But essentially, you can see that we've kind of tried our level best to reach a wide range of South Africans across the 9 provinces. And so this is our current status. These are the deliveries that have been completed. 232,000 parcels have been delivered to households across the country, and 250,000 parcels, which is our target, have been distributed to middle mile, which means to the community-based organizations, and basically out for delivery to households within the coming days. I just wanted to close on kind of opportunities for collaboration. So one of the things, as I mentioned, is thinking about inclusive sort of last mile systems, and that includes building out inclusive supply chains and payment solutions. So finding ways to distribute cash, finding ways to bring in smallholder farmers whose produce is not making it to market. How can we leverage the large kind of logistics capability that we have actually almost demonstrated through this first phase of work to build a different system, right? And I think that this is a big question for us, and we'd like to think about what specifically our role would be within that, given that it's a sort of a big undertaking. The second would be to think about a coordination platform for future relief efforts, or even, I guess, ongoing food relief efforts. The Solidarity Fund finds itself in a kind of, as an independent body, in a good place for being that sort of central coordinating point for both civil society, private sector, and government. And so we're curious to hear what role we might be able to play. And finally, I know that there's plenty of other ideas that have been raised here. In terms of food relief, we're also thinking about what role does do food gardens have? How can we think about procurement differently? I think those are questions that are on our mind, and we'd love your input. And then finally, I would say that I think that there's a what, and then there's the how. There's a what you do, and then there's a how you do it. And it would be helpful to get inputs from this room around what the kind of institutional form or process of that collaboration could look like, so that things can move quickly. So I will pause there, and I presume that there's time for questions later.
Yes, thank you very much for that openness and sharing and transparency. And even accountability, because, it's public money and donations. And so this input into this platform is very, very welcome. I'm going to try and bring in Tim Abba. Tim, are you there? He's a small-scale farmer.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go for it, Tim.
Thank you. I think I want to echo all the sentiments of the previous speakers. Myself, from a farmer's perspective, because I'm a smallholder farmer and we deal with farmers every day. With Dora's Green Business College, we have been providing permaculture and agroecology training to the smallholder farmers within the whole country, So after the lockdown was announced, it came as a shock to most farmers. One, most of the fresh produce, because we farm with seasons. Now, most of the fresh produce were ready for market. And as you know, all the traders, informal traders in town, all the restaurants had to be closed down. Most of the farmers had offtake agreements. It means like the perishable goods now had to perish. So there was no clear planning on if we announce the lockdown, what's the plan B for the farmers? People must eat. The shopping centers, if they Pick and Pay or ShopRite, they buy, you will have to go to with the price, So most of the farmers, they were vulnerable. Most of them, their fresh produce were getting perished. So we say, how do we help these farmers? And most of the families, they were left without income. So we had to come up with a plan of us purchasing fresh produce from the farmers and donate the poor and needy families. That's number one. Number two, most of the farmers, they need inputs like seeds. Compost. And I was thinking that the seeds you couldn't buy. I think the government did not have a good planning on that part, because if you say there's a lockdown, some of these seeds, seedling, compost, these are essential services. We need to continue farming. Yes, people might be on lockdown, but the stomachs must be recharged 2-3 times a day. So I think from that point of view, I'm not sure about now, because even now farmers are still struggling. Our agriculture extension officers, they are not on the ground. You call them and ask them, guys, do you have any seeds for the farmers? Do you have any resources? They say, no, we don't have anything. They will tell you our procurement, there's nothing happening because it's lockdown. I think from that point of view, there's something lacking. So with us, we had to start the Ubuntu project, because most of the people are coming and complaining, we are poor, we don't have food, we are struggling. Then we started to give them a box of fresh produce, of which got spinach, beetroot, cabbage, peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, 6 eggs, dry beans, and some soaps, honey, lettuce, cucumber, for them to eat, to keep them going. It's not sustainable. But then we say, how is sustainable to the farmers, to the community members, to keep them going? Can't we give them things like seeds, seedlings, compost, and a garden magazine? You can only teach someone how to fish, then he can feed himself for the rest of his life. Then on top of the fresh produce box, we started giving them what we call the Ubuntu gardening starter pack, of which got like 50 seedlings, 2 packets of winter crop seeds, 1 packet of herb, and then we got 20 kg of compost. And above all, there's a training guide on gardening, because now you can't run workshops during the lockdown. So when we go to their homes, you engage them like 20 minutes. This is spinach. This is how you grow it, how to plant it and stuff, the care. So it got all the information inside there. Fun enough, you
What's happening? Tim, I'm sorry, we lost you there. And I'm just a bit worried about time. Tim? Okay. I think we're going to leave it there with Tim, and I'm sure if he gets plugged in again, we can bring him into the conversation. There's been some great feedback on the chat stream as well, and some very, very important issues. So I just want to kind of zoom in on some of these things so we have a broader conversation. So many comments relate to the reach of food parcels. And you know, it's clear that not everybody's targeted and so on. So, you know, and that's a very serious issue. Mervin's point was very, very important about the costing around food parcels. The fact that we need food parcels that actually, if it's 3,400, only lasts 2 weeks, you're going to have to have a follow through, a second round of distribution, etc. So this is on a massive scale. So one of the contributions that has come through is that we need to coordinate, we need to decentralize. But I'd like to open this up to the panel just on the immediate food relief issue and getting parcels out there. What are your thoughts on this issue? Who would like to go first? I mean, I don't want to put Anoki in the seat to solve this problem. It's a common problem. We all have to grapple with this challenge and all put our strengths and weight into this. So who would like to step up around food relief parcels, and how do we make this work if we assume we're going to be working together?
Yeah, I can come in first.
Sure, Dora.
For me, one of the urgent things is really for the DSD to lift up the ban on kitchens, right, and soup kitchens. That's like an immediate thing, because by closing these facilities, you're already closing many millions who don't have access to homes to be able to prepare the meals. People are starving. Let's get them the food. If we are concerned about the scare of spreading the virus, then let's bring in assistance from government, from DSD and others, to be able to make sure that there is social distancing while the food is being delivered. Let's also lift up the 48-hour request for permission to distribute, right? Why are we doing this? Are we not happy with the way that civil society has been doing this thing? Let's come together instead of just issuing in more and more regulations, because we know that government alone is not able to reach the many people that are starving. We don't expect that from them. We know that the resources are not enough. Why don't we hold hands together and actually look at what are the challenges that government has noticed within civil society food distribution schemes, and be able to iron those out. Let's not also push the DSD lists on civil society. DSD, let DSD take care of its own lists. And because we even have people who are supposedly on DSD lists who are still starving. And the civil society is also inundated with requests. And we are raising resources that are not specifically from government. And we are not expecting DSD to come up with miracles. But also at the same time, we need DSD to be reasonable about some of these regulations that are putting forward. There's no way that we could be able to get our people to wait while we are waiting for a 48-hour permission to be issued by SABC and DSD. They don't have enough capacity to be able to deal with this. Just another case in point, the issue of the 350 COVID-19 grant that has been issued, it has to be done online. many people have attempted, they're not able to reach that. In the meantime, while they're still waiting to get onto the list, they need to eat. Like Tim was saying, the stomach doesn't wait. There are also other issues like the issue of child support grants that support caregiver. What about a woman who's got 4 children? They've been supplementing that child support care grant by doing domestic work, and they're no longer able to do it right now. They are starving. I think in the midst of DSD sorting out its other challenges, like these grants I've mentioned, they must allow civil society to continue providing the food, of course, within the regulations of people being social distancing, of wearing protective clothing to make sure that there is no spread. So for me, that is one of the most urgent things. Let's loose the screws. Let's not tighten the screws. Thank you. Excellent,
Dora. Anybody else wants to come in around how we rise to this challenge of immediate food relief? Mervyn, your thoughts?
Yes, could I go back to the idea around? I fully agree with what Dora has said just before me. Building on that is this whole issue when we come to DSD, the times that their lists are taking. People are just giving up on that request. So therefore, the churches should be allowed to do some stuff. But we have a big problem with who qualifies for what. And we think that the qualifications that are being set up, the regulations around who qualifies for what, really should just be done away with. And we should use the proxy of value of homes. It's not unheard of in other parts of the world where governments will go into a particular area and say this area, because of the cost of housing is extremely low, we can therefore presume that everyone in this area is poor, and then just do that and just roll out the food that we can. So that's another area I think that DSD needs to review, and it could get food into the hands of those who need it much, much quicker. Perhaps also for a later stage, we could also talk around price controls and increases in food costs at retail levels.
Thank you, Mervyn. Anybody else wants to come in around how we make food relief work? There's the point about democratizing this process, dialogue, working with communities. This is a very, very important point. So, for example, Des, are you all organized enough amongst the fisher folk and subsistence fishers to be able to say you can work with the Solidarity Fund and get this relief out?
No, we certainly can. We are organized. We are not for profit. We are registered with social department. We have people all along the coastline that are fishing, that live in communities. So we are well organized. I must also add as well as Coalition of the Poor. The shack dwellers movement, the biggest movement in South Africa, based in Durban, are well organized. Their leaders are well known. They know their people. The hostel dwellers, likewise, they know their people. They live amongst the people. Bringing in NGOs and groups that don't live amongst people is where the problem becomes, because it's politicized. And I think we need to shift away the distribution point to people that are leaders in their own communities, that work in their communities, that represent their people in those communities. So fisher folk, for example, we have a list of names, thousands of fisher folk and their leaders all along the coastline and in the suburbs and townships of Durban. Likewise with the shack dwellers. They've got their leaders, they've got their representatives in every formal shack. 500 shack dwellers in Durban, in shacks. They've got leaders in those communities. Same thing with the hostels, same thing with the informal traders. So if you go to the leaders, you get rid of the politicizing and who gets and who doesn't get. In fact, it goes directly to poor people. It gives them the relief, it removes the hunger, and it provides meals for them and their families on the table. And it's a win-win situation. We are willing to work with government on that. We think that the government missed the trick here, and they should have came and worked together with people. I think when you go outside of that, whilst we have many NGOs in this country and many people will know them, not all of them really do work with communities and poor communities. I think it's time now to move away from that, from the traditional NGOs, and go to the people on the ground And we are willing to cooperate and work together with the department to ensure that those in need really get the food parcels. I've seen people cry tears. I've seen family cry tears. I've seen children cry tears because they go to bed without food. I think this has to stop. We need to come with a new direction. We need to come with a surety that those that suffer the most, those who are impoverished, they really get food to them. And that's what I think is the best idea, the best way forward. And my details are available. I'm willing to put my shoulder behind the wheel and I don't need to get paid for it. I don't want money to get into any one of our pockets. I think that the poor and the suffering of this country need to be addressed, and they need the food parcels, and they need it urgently.
So I think there's other points coming up related to this from the chat stream. So there's the point about informal traders. This is very, very important. We have mentioned this as part of unlocking the commons. And again, there are levels of organization amongst informal traders. They can easily be networked into a local-based partnership, into a national-based partnership, working with the Solidarity Fund, working with the government, and they can be very, very crucial channels. The other thing that's come up, or maybe not enough of, is the schools. I mean, 9 million children get a hot meal in schools, and that has just been shut down. And so again, here's another stream that government can think about activating within public health guidelines, etc., to make things happen on the ground. I don't know, Anoki, if you want to say something about some of these ideas that have been coming up, or any of your own thoughts around how we can scale up food relief.
Sure. So I think one of so in terms of, I know there's a lot of questions on the chat as well, and so the Solidarity Fund had just a point of clarification before I answer your question, is that the Solidarity Fund had initially said that they would deliver that we would deliver 250,000 parcels in the kind of period of the lockdown, and we are close to kind of completion of that. And so the question then becomes for us, what is the kind of next round of our food program, and does it take the form of parcels, or does it take the form of supporting people to grow their own food, or linking suppliers to market? Does it take the form of something else, right? And I think that's kind of what this discussion is really helping us think through. On the issue of kind of the coordination piece, I mean, I think I'm sympathetic to the issues on the ground, which is that there is concerns around security, concerns around managing, managing distribution going out to different areas and potential duplication, and then of course gaps emerging as a result. And I think that there are perhaps one of the things that we can do is actually use some of these new technological platforms that are being developed to do better coordination. And those platforms exist. I mean, I know that Help Out, or I guess they're now called Link2, has developed such a platform. But those platforms are only as good as the number of people who use them. And so if we can kind of decide that we will coalesce around one or two platforms and allow us to have a way of seeing where the relief is going and how to best direct the relief and where the gaps are, perhaps that could be one way of addressing the problem. I'm aware that the scale of the problem is so large that we will kind of, there's no kind of perfect solution going forward.
Okay, thanks for that. I think the issue of production is very, very important in this whole challenge. Household level production, small scale, micro farmers, small farmers, and including getting small scale fishers to fish again. So can we explore this issue a little bit more? I mean, what are the challenges? How do we connect production now to also the food effort in the country, and what's standing in the way of that? So, where's our friend Tim Abba? Has he disappeared? Okay, that's a pity. Okay, but I'd really like you to give us some sense of this. I mean, Food Flow says they've paid a total of 961,884 to small-scale food producers to sustain livelihoods, 300 farmers, fishers, and bakers, and I think that's excellent. Dora raised this question as well about how food is sourced right now, even for food relief. So So connecting production to immediate food relief, but also connecting production beyond immediate food relief. I think this is a very central question. And any thoughts around this and how that we scale this up? Or how do we support this and enable this? What's coming from practice? Anybody?
Yes, I can talk about it because we've been working with Tim and other producers, largely in Gauteng, and I've just been off a call with others in KZN who are working on this similar approach. Already there are many organizations that are doing this, that are tackling the issue of food provision and attaching growing to it. The Green Business College, together with Tim and others through the Ubuntu program, we have been doing that. And I think it's really important to note that this is, we have to capitalize on the issue that we already are reaching out to households. And as we are going there, really looking at dealing with the immediate food relief issues, we should be building on a system where they are already growing their own food, meaning providing the resources that Tim was talking about, the seeds, the seedlings, the compost, and whatever need that they have, really bringing them in as part of the whole the movement of growing their own food and building on local economic development, where in the future they could be able to have food for their own consumption, but they could also be able to sell the excess that they have. It's something that needs to be thought through, but a lot of organizations are already bringing their heads together. There is some work that is being done under the C19 auspices that is mapping the small producers in the various areas, looking at what are they producing, what resources do they need, but also looking on the input side. What are some of the inputs that they need right now for them to be able to continue growing the food that we so much need? And also looking at the access to markets. Who are they selling to, and who's there that could be able to support them in this work? Looking at some of the government infrastructure, like the agri-hubs that have been laying dormant that could be utilized to support the smallholder farmers in various areas. And I think there are lessons that can be learned. And this is the work that is being done by many organizations without a government support, that government can be able to learn from and build from, and be able to make sure that, post-COVID, we have these food issues being addressed in this way, that should a disaster of this nature hit again, we're going to be having a totally different conversation. I think it is important to unlock the food commons, the schools where people have already been growing gardens, the open spaces that people have been used communally to be able to grow, for them to be able to access and to go back to grow, but also to be part of the supplying of the food that is needed right now, for them to sell to the organizations that Solidarity Fund is funding, to be able to procure from, to make sure that the food that is being given by Solidarity Fund service providers has got nutritious vegetables with it. It's not just food in the stomach; it's actually nutritious food, and that our people also have a contribution. They can feel the pride that they too are not just receiving a handout. They are able to participate in tackling this challenge of COVID-19. They can be able to grow their own food. They can start producing seedlings that they can grow in exchange for money that they need for other resources. So this is something that we have piloted with Tim and other farmers in the area, where we are buying from them to provide into their own communities and assisting the communities to start growing their own vegetables right now.
Yeah, I mean, we call this pathway building in terms of food sovereignty, and kind of anchoring this around hubs and things like that. And for us, the time has arrived for this, and we are going to be putting a big push into this, and we'll continue raising this with the Solidarity Fund. But Des, I want to bring you in about fishers here. I mean, what quantity of fish, sort of fishing, is produced by small-scale fishers? Where does that go to, and all of that? Help us understand it, because they do feed people in our communities.
Thanks. Can you hear me, Vish?
Yeah.
Look, I think the first prize will be that the people get back to fish. They can do social justice. They've been doing it for many years, hundreds of years. And that will alleviate them relying on government to give them food, because they can catch the fish during this period, the winter period. As we go into the waters are cold, you have all the sardines on our coastline. They could be catching the sardines, getting the sardines, taking home and putting food on the table. A nice sardines fry is very good and tasty, right? And all the fish that follow the sardines on this coastline. So we promote the sardines all over the world for tourism. Sardines are very good edible fish for diet, for dietitian, for people to feed their hunger. That is the first prize. So we can get fishermen back to the first prize. Secondly, there are only 48 co-ops in the country, 48 people in Durban that belong to co-ops. We're talking about 30,000 fishermen here. So you're not going to give grocery parcels are not going to go to, we can only feed 48 people if they do get it. I doubt very much they are even getting that. So it's not addressing anything that we are talking about to alleviate poverty. Thirdly, I want to say that the government should not be coming down with a heavy hand on all our people. Our people have come from huge struggles. They are suffering on the ground. They need the government to open up. And there's no way, if you're fishing, you can apply, you can have all the masks and everything, and you can defend your health needs away from COVID-19. It can be done. It's been done already. I can't see the difference between the fishing community that fishes on boats and the people who fish on the beach. The beaches are empty. There's nobody swimming at the moment. There's no surfing at the moment. So there's a need. They can get the fishermen back. That will cut back on the grocery parcels that they can't afford to give everybody, and they're not giving to the fishermen. That will help a long way to alleviate that. We need to find different ways. As I said in the beginning, this is one way of eliminating poverty amongst our people and giving them dignity. You can't, the more the coronavirus goes on, the more people will be affected, the more people will be affected with poverty and die from poverty, and we can't have that. I think government needs to be reasonable here and needs to allow our people to go back to fish, which they've been doing and which they should do and can do without impacting on anybody's health and well-being. I think that's the way to do it. We are available to work with them on that. And if they want to do the grocery packs, as I suggested, that government needs to find a new way. The old way is going back to the very same people and a few people, and it's not going to a broader community that really needs food. I think government, needs to look at that carefully, because the groups that they've been working with don't live in the communities and they fail to address the needs of people. And we've seen so many people fighting. There's been so many protests during this period because they're not getting the food. So please, let's not go back to the same way that you've been dealing with. It is a fair way. It has created more animosity and fights, and it'll continue with that day if we don't stop and go to the right root causes of it, and let's deal with it in a proper, informative way so that everybody can benefit, everybody can put food on the table, and not only a few people.
So both Dora and Des have underlined the point that if we unlock the food commons, small-scale food producers, fisher folk, but also informal traders, you already are feeding people. They are feeding themselves already. Okay, they don't need to be now on lists, etc., to be targeted for food parcels. Now, this is a big issue. So there's thousands and thousands of fishers. There's about 2.6 million people in informal sector trading and food, etc. There's thousands of micro farmers, etc., hotspots. So immediately people can self-provision food right there. The other point that has come out here is that you can connect this, of course, to food relief, because you can link back into these food producers, fisher folks, etc., and you can harvest, if you like, or harness their food and channel that into food relief. So in this way, we're also strengthening what has always been peripheral, outside of our food system, if you like, but you are building the alternative food system. So I think this is an important takeaway also for the Solidarity Fund. I want us to explore very quickly, given time constraints, the undocumented xenophobia, the exclusion of people from receiving food parcels, etc. This has come up in various comments, okay? Can we get some perspective on this? I want to kick off with you, Anoki. I mean, what has been the experience of the Solidarity Fund reaching undocumented peoples reaching people that are not supposedly South African but living in South Africa and so on? Can we get some input on that?
Sure, and let me actually also just use this time to reflect on the previous point you made around kind of what is standing in the way of integrating smaller farmers or small scale farmers and producers into the supply chains. And I think one of the critical issues that we are trying to resolve is in practicality. If you're trying to do a large scale distribution, the practicality of actually making those links between supply and market needs a lot of effort, right? And it doesn't mean that it can't be done, but you've got kind of uneven volumes. You don't necessarily know where all the volumes are supposed to go. You need to make sure that there was a truck there to pick up that product to take it somewhere else. Now, all of these things can be solved, but in the short time frame that the work is happening in, that is something that's a critical problem that needs to be resolved when you're figuring out the actual logistics of this, right? And the actual logistics are actually quite complicated. Doesn't mean they can't be solved, but I want to sort of belabor that point a little bit, because we've received requests for someone saying, oh, we've got X amount of produce to donate, and then it's in some location and we're not quite sure how to get it from A to B, and then the cost of that, and then who will be the recipient. I mean, all those things it's very, very high touch. And so, that's one of the things that we're really grappling with in trying to think about a solution here. On the undocumented workers, I mean, our position has been that we do not require an ID to receive a food parcel. So undocumented workers are receiving our Solidarity Fund's food parcels. I mean, the exact kind of proportion of that and how we'll be able to identify them will only be made clear when we receive all our beneficiary reports in the coming weeks. I should also say that it's not just foreign migrants who are undocumented. There are many South Africans who don't have IDs. There are, children households who might not have IDs. So it's not necessarily just a foreign migrant issue. It's just a general inclusion principle that we have followed at the fund.
Mervyn, is there any such experience and challenges in Pietermaritzburg around exclusion and so on?
So, what we have been seeing, I mean, and our reach is very, very limited. So I cannot speak for the whole of Pietermaritzburg. But for us, the exclusion really is not so much the issue of foreigners versus locals. I mean, for us, the exclusion is the fact that just not enough people are getting access to food and sufficient food, and that goes right across the board. And so that for us is the issue that we need to resolve: is how can we get more food into the hands of a greater number of people. But we haven't really seen in any massive scale, at least from our experience, and as I said, our experience is limited, around the issues of xenophobia and the exclusion of people based on the fact of nationality.
Thanks.
And so therefore I think what you had suggested around opening up the commons and trying to connect the commons with where the needs are, I think that's an area critical for us to explore going forward.
Thank you. Tim, you came back. Do you want to say something about small-scale farmers and but particularly your relief work? And are you reaching everybody in communities, etc.?
Yeah, from our side, yeah, we are trying to reach as many communities as possible, because until now, we have reached over 700 households. That's like a 5 for each township we go for 100 households. So we have reached like 7 townships, and in the coming weeks, if we get support, we might reach up to 500. And then on the issue, food got no race, color, gender, nationality. COVID-19, it's affecting the human race, not the chickens, not the goats, not the crops. It's the people. And if you go on a selective mode and say, I'll give the locals, the foreigners I don't, from my experience from the project, when you go to the community leaders, they even show you this documented, undocumented, it's a big debate. And most of the people that we deal with, even smallholder farmers, some of them are foreigners, some of them are local. So from the broader point, it's food. Let people eat, and let there be enough during this lockdown. Our people, we got like 17 million people who are suffering from 6.5 from high blood, 6 million from diabetes, 6 like cancer. That's like half of the country. Got 7.2 million people going to bed on an empty stomach. COVID-19 has left people in their household. There's no income. Let's reach them. We are using the farmers with the produce to reach them. The government must step in. The private sector must come in and help support this initiative. If we keep putting these red tapes and say, let's have a centralized parcel donation place, we won't reach people, Our people are desperate. And the third world war, it should not be about ammunition, or about wealth, or about money. It should be about food.
Tim, we're having problems hearing you. Tim, we're having problems hearing you. So I'm going to wrap up now.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. We have had over 200 participants in this webinar, and thank you to all of the participants. We couldn't just open it up because we wanted to have a very structured and focused conversation. I must say that there's some very, very important issues that have come up both from the chat stream, but also from the panelists that we need to think about going forward. I mean, the first issue is over-regulation. That's coming through thick and fast. And it's not just rhetoric about clamping down, and it's not just rhetoric about tightening the screws, etc. On the ground, there's clearly officialdom marching through our societies, and it is stopping people from acting on compassion, concern, and solidarity. And that is very real right now. And this, I think, is a common concern and challenge for all of us. This is a recipe for catastrophe in our society. And so going forward in terms of a dialogue with the minister and a dialogue with the Solidarity Fund, which we will be pursuing together with other allies, this is a very, very crucial issue. We have to unblock this thing now. I think the other point to make is that some of the national regulation has been implemented haphazardly, okay? And so, where informal traders are allowed to trade in national regulation under level 4, you are seeing local governments do their own thing. And in the main, keeping informal traders out of their economic livelihoods. So again, we've got to sit together. We've got to talk about unblocking this issue now. The other point that's very, very important is around food prices. So the big food value chain producers, the big supermarkets, the 3,000 odd farming operations that really produce the core of the value chain in South Africa, they are pushing up food prices. And this is something we really need to engage on as part of a common partnership. There needs to be a focus on this issue. Okay, it's adding further to the household squeeze. It's adding to the hunger. It's adding to the pushback of people into poverty. So we have to talk to that issue together. The point about dialogue and participation, I think it's very, very important that if we start thinking about a framework, this has to break with a centralized mold of doing things and a centralized approach to tackling these challenges. We're going to have to think about decentralized partnership. We're going to have to think about local leadership stepping up and working with a whole set of institutions, Solidarity Fund, Department of Social Development, etc. That space has to be created. Communities understand their needs. Communities understand how to work together amongst themselves. And it's important that we start making these connections. So this ecology exists. It's there. We need to work with it, and we need to bring it into the way forward. This is absolutely important. I think the other point that's come out very strongly is the role of the Solidarity Fund. And if I understood Anoki correctly, This has been an intervention, a crisis-based intervention. It's been finding its way. It's been trying to use resources as smartly as it can, but it also understands that the challenge is very big. And so in terms of its role around immediate food relief, I think there's a lot of food for thought coming out of this conversation for how the Solidarity Fund should work. I think also how the Solidarity Fund positions in partnership, in dialogue with grassroots communities, that has come out strongly in this conversation. I think the other point is around connecting with production and unlocking the food commons. If we unlock the food commons right now, many, many people in this country will be feeding themselves, and they won't have to be on an aid list or a parcel list or whatever it is. It also means that food relief can be connected to production, to fishing, etc. And I think this is a very, very important issue around the influence that the Solidarity Fund has, and it needs to, together with us, start engaging on these issues with government. I think what's also come out very clearly here is that the framework we've been talking about as the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign is shared by many. So whether it's about holding the supermarkets accountable and getting them to price ethically, to also take up solidarity buying, I think that's an important issue. We cannot let them off the hook. I think the point about unlocking the commons, a lot has been said in this discussion. And this includes school feeding schemes. This includes the local street soup kitchen. It includes the small-scale farmers, the small-scale fishers, etc. This is a very, very important issue if we are going to go forward. But the point about the commons is that we need to also ensure that it's part of building the next food economy. It needs to be part of trailblazing around food sovereignty. And this is a very, very important issue, again, that we want to further engage with the Solidarity Fund and government on. I think the third issue that has come out is that we've got to widen the remit of players around food relief right now. And I have said this, but decentralizing, but in a way that brings in local leadership, local dialogue, local participation is going to be very, very important. And finally, the basic income grant, the COVID relief grant, I mean, Mervin's figures, etc., about households is really coming short. So both food as well as the lack of income is going to give us a very rocky road going forward. If we do not tackle these two issues, and there are enough answers in these conversations, we do not tackle these two issues, South Africa under lockdown is going to be a very volatile place, okay? We are not going to be able as a society to rise to the challenge of dealing with the COVID pandemic. People are going to be on the streets because of hunger. They're going to be on the streets because they have no money. So here's a moment where we can work together, build a partnership, build a common framework, and tackle the pandemic while at the same time meeting societal needs. Now, this conversation doesn't end here. It's going to continue. So thank you to all our panelists. It is also going to continue after this. We are going to be setting up a meeting with the minister to share this conversation, but also take forward some of the ideas that have been put forward for a common framework. We are going to ask for a meeting with the Solidarity Fund to also further engage and deliberate on these issues. The door seems to be open, and I think we will invite allies so that we work together and we move forward together. Thank you to all of you for your time. Thank you to the participants again, and apologies because we couldn't just bring everybody into the conversation. It was a very big audience, but your comments have been noted and they're informing our conversation and way forward. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mervin. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Dora.
Right, a very constructive conversation there on the worsening food crisis. The South African Food Sovereignty Campaign has called for the Solidarity Fund to be democratized and government to form partnerships with civil society, and you heard those pleas there. So that webinar we just took you to is looking at the causes and solutions to worsening food and hunger crisis and challenges in government versus civil society relationship. leadership. Of course, a lot of people saying that there's so much hunger that this could cause, people getting upset and people protesting the fact that there simply isn't food. Some problems that have been highlighted, the fact that households have been told that they don't qualify for food parcels. Some complaining about the fact that although they do earn more than the minimum allowed for food parcels, they are still struggling. So these are some of the issues and realities, and the fact that people are being excluded from receiving food parcels because they are not South African. So that issue regarding xenophobia perhaps being raised there, and a plea for further communication and help for those on the ground suffering and impoverished. So those are the issues there, and the speaker indicating that we must understand that the scale of food insecurity, even before COVID-19, which has really just sort of exacerbated that crisis. So those are some of the conversations that are happening, and also some solutions that are being looked at this time. Let's take a short break. Your headlines after this.